Hey, welcome guys to the Honest Youth Pastor Off the Cuff podcast. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I came across a video the other day on my Explore page on Instagram, and it was ABC apparently does these Faith Fridays in which they invite pastors, religious leaders, spiritual influencers, if you want to call it that, on to offer hope or words of encouragement or whatever from their faith on these Fridays as people, go into the weekend, and obviously services of all different religions have not been able to meet. So they have people on. Now, I am not going to mention the pastor's name or whether a pastor on this podcast. In fact, whenever it mentions it in the interview, you'll notice there's a distinct blank. It just won't be there. I'll cut it out, because the point here is not to critique this pastor specifically, nor his church. It is simply to say, hey, look, this is the opportunity that was given to a pastor, a fairly large church, to say, hey, in this time of hope, we have Jesus. Now, we'll say more about that later. I just want you to hear this interview. And again, I can't stress this enough, though obviously somebody's going to maybe DM and take it the wrong way. But the reason I'm doing this is to demonstrate that we as Christians, one, have to be bold in speaking about Jesus, but two, that if we're not bold about speaking about Jesus, there is literally nothing different about our quote-unquote religion than anyone else's. As you listen to this, see if there's anything distinctly Christian that this pastor says. Because what is the point of the church, or a pastor specifically, if we are not proclaiming the word of Jesus and what he's done for us and what that means? So as we listen to this, just keep that in mind. I'll cut in and out as we go through this interview just to point some things out that really I noticed as I watched this. And then at the end, we'll do some wrap-ups.
And it is Faith Friday here at ABC. And as most of the nation goes on over a month of virtual lockdown, and we know a little motivation, well, it can go a very long way. So here to help lift our spirits as we head into this weekend, we're so happy to see you doing well today, because we know you tested positive for COVID-19 last month. And despite being sick, you continued to preach. Why?
Well, I preached in isolation. That needs to be said. It was just me and another sick camera operator. But yeah, I just felt like, our church is dealing with the sickness. So I figured it made sense to just kind of try to preach through it and give some hope where I could. And yeah, we somehow made it.
So I know as we go through this and I step in, there's going to be people that are like, hey, you're just nitpicking. You're just, why are you doing that? Here's the thing. He was just handed a perfect opportunity. So why did you, even when you were sick, still preach? And he offers the thing that, my people still needed hope. My people, I did it, and somehow we made it through it. And I mean, if you were talking about a softball question about talking about Jesus, why did you continue to preach even though you were sick? Yeah, my people needed hope. He did say hope, but here's the thing. I wanted an answer that would have been, biblical would have been, I wanted my people to grow and hear in Jesus and about Jesus, to see that even in sickness, it doesn't matter, that the word of God still must go out, that even in sickness, we want to proclaim the word. Like, there's so many different ways you could have pointed that back to Jesus. And this pastor, when he does preach, the sermons I've heard, he mentions Jesus. Again, that's all preferential as far as how much he does it in his sermons. But the point is that, on this interview, that's going to be aired to way more people than his congregation. He says that I preached because my people needed hope, and somehow we got through it. Again, might be nitpicking, but let's keep going.
Yeah, you look great. You got a big old smile on your face, so I'm hoping you're feeling better now. And we've seen you, preaching in front of just enormous crowds, and I'm sure you feel their energy and you feed off one another. What has it been like to do quite the opposite, preach from afar?
It's been really different. I think when you preach to thousands, you're always taught to speak to the thousands, but find the one. And it's kind of reversed now, where we're speaking to the one to reach thousands.
Speaking of messaging, a lot of people, we're going into now another month of this, and people are feeling very exhausted, a lot of anxiety, and some people might feel some despair and fear. How do you boost resilience in these challenging times?
All right, so the question is set up. So in case, like, if I'm in this interview and I do miss that first softball question, right, she now sets it up that, hey, people all over the world that are going to be watching this are suffering from an anxiety, a fear, an uncertainty. Like, what do you have to tell them, pastor, right? What do you have to tell them, religious leader, right, of Christianity? Like, what do you have to tell them to bolster them or to encourage them? So this is how it's set up. Like, it could not be easier. Let's see what happens.
Well, I think firstly, you just thank God for teachers. So any parents that are dealing with homeschooling, like me and my wife, every day, we just thank God that there is a brighter day coming where we can get our kids out of the house. But
Amen.
I think we're all there. I think it's okay to feel a little bit, just out of balance right now. And I think it's when you lean on your community and your friends and your relationships that bring life to you. But we're going to get through it. We can't make permanent decisions in temporary valleys. That's a huge deal right now. And we're just trying to remind people that God is still good in the middle of this. And we didn't ask for this crisis, but we are absolutely going to make the absolute best out of it. And hopefully we'll come at it as better than we started it.
I can't tell you. Like, okay, so when I first watched this, I was like, I was waiting with anticipation for this answer, because I thought, something, fine. The first, question, you didn't mention Jesus, fine. But then it's, what do you have to offer? And it's, his first response is, I want my kids out of my house. Now, this isn't saying he doesn't love his kids. I'm just saying that's just a knee-jerk reaction because of being trapped inside the house, probably. But then he says, lean on community. And then he says, God is still good. Make the best of it. There's nothing distinctly Christian about this whatsoever. Not at all. Not even close to distinctly Christian. One, he only mentions God once, and that is in a very ambiguous way. I mean, anybody could listen to this, and if they didn't know that he was a quote-unquote Christian pastor, would be like, okay, yeah, I can get on board with this. Anyone with any semblance of religion could get on board with this, because God is, ambiguous. There's no distinct God. He's not pointing to Jesus here. And here's the thing. Somebody will be like, well, he's assuming that people know that it's Jesus because it's connected with Christianity. If he is, which I really don't think he is, I think he's smart enough to know that people aren't doing that, making that connection. But if he is making that assumption, then he's lost it. So it's make the best of it, which is a great inspirational speech, right? He puts a little bit of like a tweetable quote in there for some dumb reason, and leaves it at an ambiguous God. So, okay, let's hear more from this Christian pastor.
What is your message as we head into the weekend for everyone who is listening to you right now?
The times are going to change, and hopefully the goal is that we can find out some of the things, in us that maybe we're lacking, that we didn't know about before the pandemic, and have God work in us. So maybe the next time we're in a crisis, we're even more ready, we're even more faith-filled, and that's our goal right now. We've seen, that story you just had on the pilots, and there's good news out there if you want to look for it. People who are not running from this, but they're actually trying to be a light in the middle of what is a lot of darkness, especially in our city. So I think that's our message, is that do everything you can to be kind to somebody else, to lift somebody else's head, to be encouraging, because we need it right now.
Yeah. Pastor, what have you learned about yourself during these times?
I've learned that our house is pretty small. My kids are pretty loud, and my dogs eat a lot of food. And I've also learned that I really love people, maybe even more than I realized, because you take for granted so much when you have so much access to it. And then when you lose some of that freedom, you really start to feel what you love and what you don't want to be without. And so for me, it's put a renewed value on relationships and not taking things for granted. We have lost some friends in this crisis. Our church is filled with people that are dealing with the loss of loved ones or somebody who's sick. And it just reminds you to not take a day for granted. Yeah. If you love somebody, tell them. If you get a chance to hug them, maybe not hug, maybe virtually hug right now. Do that. If somebody has been a blessing to you, let them know about it, because this life, it's a vapor, and we need to do everything we can to maximize it at all times. I've learned that I need to be even more aware about how precious these days are.
Yep. I got chills when you said that. I love that.
All right. And that's where the interview ends. She says his name, and then, the interview's over. But so he ends. These are his last moments, his last words. I mean, possibly the last time that anybody's ever going to hear from him, unless he's on, this station again. And his advice is times will change, that, we need to be a light in the darkness, which when you're speaking in Christian terms, somebody that's a Christian might understand that means to, be a light in a dark world, which means take Jesus into the darkness that is sin and depravity that's in the world. You're supposed to be the light in the world. But he says, be kind, be encouraging. Again, Christian virtues there, but they're not tied to Jesus. And then when she asks what he's learned about himself, he just learned that, he took people for granted, and he shouldn't do that anymore, and neither should anybody else. Now, he does mention God once again in his answer when he says, we need to have God work in us in these times because there's some things maybe we saw in ourselves that we didn't know were there. But again, this is such an ambiguous, that could literally be anything. So why am I making this podcast? Well, like I said at the beginning, the world has a very limited idea of what Christianity is. So much of the information they get about Christianity is either from people they know that call themselves Christians, or the little clips they see on Facebook with pastors preaching, or interviews like this that they have, essentially forced on them as they're watching the nightly news, right? So out of all of those things they're likely to watch or listen to, it's probably the television. They're all trapped in their house and in front of the TV anyway. And so this Christian pastor, quote unquote, so-called, gets on the television and is interviewed in front of billions of people and is asked, hey, where's your hope found? What advice do you have in this pandemic when people are scared and anxious and they don't have hope in anything? Like, what, pastor, is your advice? And he points to God twice, in a very ambiguous way. But basically he says, lean on your community, make the best of it, be kind and encouraging, it'll change, just take people for granted. There's no mention of Jesus. There's no mention of the hope found in Jesus. There's no mention of the life-changing ability of understanding who he is and what he can do and what that does in your life. What point is it to have a pastor on a television show and ask him, where's your hope found? If, pastor, you're not going to point to that hope, if you're not going to mention the one that saved you, the actual name of the one that saves you, Jesus. It's just crazy to me. Now, I know there's probably going to be somebody that messages me or DMs me and says, hey, well, give us a great example of somebody being on television that did do this correctly, that did mention Jesus. And to be honest with you, I've looked from the time I saw this until the time I'm recording this. At this point, I don't see one. If you want to send one, that's great. I've been looking. But to be quite frank and just blunt, gospel preachers don't normally get interviewed on national television, because people don't want to hear the name of Jesus. They don't want to know that the hope is only found in Jesus. They want to hear terms like, tweetable phrases and be encouraging and, it'll get better. Like, that's what they want to hear. Now, if you know of a pastor that's been on television interviewed, like for a Faith Friday or something like that, sure, send it over. I'd love to hear it. The point of making this podcast, though, is not to down the pastor or his church. Again, is why I took all of this out. If you recognize his voice, I'm sorry. Again, it's not about him. It's about the message that he gave and the total lack of hope that was actually in it. The total lack of Jesus that was in it. Christian, we are to be, as he said, a light in a dark world. But if you think saying that, times will change, be encouraging, lean on your community is going to be that light when you leave out Jesus, I'm honestly, I'm at a loss for words for where you get that or what you're thinking. because Jesus is that hope. You can take all those other phrases, all the tweetable moments, all of the witty words, and throw them out the door, because without Jesus, it's all worthless. So when and if any of us get the opportunity to say, hey, what's your hope in the moment of this crisis? What words do you have for those that are anxious? I hope that we would all be bold enough to say it's Jesus. It's only Jesus. Have a great day. I'll talk to you guys later.